الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. I'm not quite used to this setup, so it's got interesting style. So this is the purpose of this is to be a slightly different type of part of the study circle, inshallah. Unlike perhaps what you're used to, this one is actually involving yourselves doing the work, and actually yourselves engaging with the Quran, reflecting on the Quran, and kind of looking into topical issues within the Quran which you can pick up on and use. So the first one we'll kind of do a bit of an introduction. I'll do a bit more of the work inshallah today, but it's a method that we've been mentioned in the Quran about reflecting on the Quran, and we often read these verses, but it's something that unfortunately very few people do, because they feel there's a barrier to being able to access the Quran, that you only need to understand the Arabic, that you have to have a teacher, and all of these, that whilst true, there is evidences, and there's strong evidences to suggest that we should all have a relationship directly ourselves, which we'll go through another day inshallah. But today the idea is mentioning the rope of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and I've put a picture there. Why have I put that picture there? Potentially. Yes?
Because
Where's the rope?
in the sky,
Yes, Omar.
you need to go up to the top.
You can go up to the top, exactly. So this is an example of a type of rope, a cable, which is consistent of metal fibers wound together, which can hold people upon people, taking them up to the mountains and so on. So you can see the type of kind of analogy, which we'll come back to in a bit inshallah. Now this looks tiny, so it's not very useful, but I will can I change the setup? I don't need this. Logo.
Make a new scene.
There we go. So make a new scene. There we go. Just to make it a bit bigger, because I think, inshallah. Perfect. Does that work? Have I just broken it more? Oh yeah, you're right. See, I think that is correct. Let's just double check. You know what? Let's
on the top one.
just go back to the original setup. I'll just read it to you, inshallah. So,
If you minimize that before.
it's okay. We've only got 7 minutes left. So, the purpose of this is essentially just a kind of a brief.
9. Yeah, half an hour.
Oh, I have half an hour. I thought it was until 9 o'clock. That's why I was kind of going through it quickly. Okay, so the purpose of this is essentially. Let me make this bigger. At least you can see. Inshallah, those online, you can follow the words we say, inshallah. So one of the questions, before we go into this, the idea of what we're going to do is tadabbur, which is to reflect on the Quran, which is to actively engage in it, which is different to tafsir, which is what you just attended, which is sitting with a teacher, sitting with someone who's received an interpretation of what the Quran means, and you are understanding what that means in accordance to the Quran and the Sunnah and so on. Tadabbur is taking that you have received and internalizing the meaning. So it's the bit that you actually are using the words that you've heard to think, what has this meant to me? So here's a bit of a table to compare the two. So the first is interpreting God's words, explaining what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant by the verse. So you're saying this verse means this. Okay? And it's not really open to interpretation, and you can see why that would be dangerous for someone who doesn't know the language or doesn't know the Quran to begin to say. Whereas tadabbur would be to use that meaning from a mufassir, or from a translator in our case. You explain what the verse speaks to you. You're not claiming nor attributing anything to God, but simply stating the thoughts it brings to mind from your own self. Another example is that tafsir will be something that brings meanings come from beyond. So it's something that you're being taught from a hadith or from another verse or from legal theology and so on, and that interprets the Quran. Whereas tadabbur is meanings that come from within, which is inspired from the words that you hear recited to you, and what you have moved and what they have moved you to think. So no attempt is made to interpret God's words. Tafsir would be saying something that says, in a very simple way, you'd say this verse means, whereas tadabbur would be this verse tells me, which is a subtle but important difference. Now, the evidence behind this, just to go into one ayah, how do we know there's a basis for tadabbur? Well, firstly, there's explicit verses where Allah says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Do they not reflect upon the Quran? But one of the most important verses that we see is a surah that I'm sure all of us know, which is one of the final surahs in the Quran, which is Surah Al-Kafirun. Now, this is where it gets a bit more interactive. Who is this verse? Who is this addressing? Who is it speaking to, Rawan? قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Who is Al-Kafirun? Non-believers. Now, if it was, let's suggest that the only way you can interpret the Quran is if you have a teacher. Who's heard that statement before? Right? Many of us. If you had to have a teacher to understand the Quran, who would the people that this verse is addressing go to? Because the disbelievers don't have a teacher because they don't believe in the first place. But yet the Quran is calling them to hear and reflect on what's being said. So you hear some form of contradiction here, because it can't be that they have to have a teacher because they don't believe in that system. But at the same time, the Quran is directly calling on the disbelievers to listen. Now, this is where I say they're not interpreting what it's being said, because in this case the words are very clear and very direct, but they are giving and calling on a person to hear what's being said, and what? The meaning then sits within you, and it's what's happening inside to you as a consequence of that meaning. Does that make sense? So this is something that is subtle, it's different, but it's important to be able to grasp and kind of work with, because it's a part and aspect of the Quran that people have neglected and actually have moved away from. And I've spoken to a number of my teachers and people I've have great respect with, who are doing stuff in this, and they feel that this is very much the type of thing that we should be doing. So today, inshallah, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a single aspect of this, which is a type of reflection that you can do. It's a little tool that empowers you to be able to then engage with the Quran and to do your own reflection. And what we're going to do is going to be a very practical thing, and we're looking at words chosen. Now, don't worry too much about the methodology, because this is something that takes a bit of time to grasp, but the principle is that there's no coincidence in the Quran. So when I'm speaking now, there's probably a few words that if you stopped on it, you'll say, why did you say that word and not this word? And I'll probably just be like, I don't know, it's just that's the way I've spoken, that's the way I've been trained. But if you listen to a politician speak, you notice they're very deliberate with the words they say, right? So they don't get caught out in the future. Now, a politician is like at the entry level of this, right? Allah Azza wa Jal, when He's speaking, has said a book, or sent a book to us, that is designed to be appropriate from the time of the Prophet ﷺ up till now, and it's the same phrase, the same words, and nothing can be used to be contradicted or different. Does that make sense? So that tells you that every single word in the Quran has been chosen for a reason.
It's amazing in the Quran how until now, 21st century, and you cannot catch the Quran. That's one thing.
Yeah. And what's amazing about it is the Quran was orated, it wasn't written. It was written after the Prophet spoke it first. Which goes to tell you, you know, when you write something, if you ever write an article, you always edit it after. You go, oh, let me change that, let me rephrase this, let me remove this. But if you speak that and then it's written, that's it. You can't change it, right? But it's perfect, not just in its wording, but in its structure, in its punctuation, in its pauses, everything, which is a miracle of the Quran. So naturally,
Is it written so you can self-reflect? So whatever's being read, your self-reflection relates to that occasion. What's written as a story, self-reflection on yourself. That this could mean that situation. What would I do? What would I do?
definitely, I mean, I definitely think that's an aspect of the Quran that is a purpose for its revelation, that you put yourself in the situation and see how would you take and learn from it. And I think the writing is also there to as a form of preservation from Allah Azza wa Jalla over the generations and so on. And it's also to show just how magnificent this book is that we have. And there's lots to say on this, inshallah. But essentially, yes, you need to know the Arabic language, but it's not it's a limiter, but it's not a barrier. There's still ways in which you can engage with this, even without the language, and you can do it through the translation. And actually, you'll notice when my father does a lot of his halakha, he'd always be like, I don't like this translation, and this is different and stuff. But there's still a level in which you can engage with this, which is useful. So what do? We look at the words and phrases in the Quran, which are deliberate, and then you essentially do the following tasks. So let's start with the verse. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. So he goes, and hold firmly to the rope of Allah and do not be divided. وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَا حُفْرَةٍ مِنَ النَّارِ فَأَنْقَذَكُمْ مِنْهَا كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ. So, and hold firmly to the rope of Allah and do not be divided. Remember Allah's favor upon you when you were enemies. Then He united your hearts, so you, by His grace, became brothers. And you were at the brink of a fiery pit, and He saved you from it. This is how Allah makes His revelations clear to you, so that you may be rightly guided. Now, as we mentioned, we're going to be looking at certain words. And the words we're going to be looking at this is bihablillah, which translates to the rope of Allah, or the rope of Allah. So, this is a type of reading of the Quran. So many of us, when you read the Quran, you pick up the Quran and you just read the English and you're just kind of reading and reading, right? Or you read the Arabic and you're just reading and reading. That is a type of the Quran where Allah calls it وَرَتِّلْ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, like just to do tartil, to reading of the Quran, right? But another type is this reflection, tadabbur, which is to read slower, more deliberately, and think about the aspects within the Quran. So that's what we're going to do here. But the first question you need to ask yourself is, what does the word mean? So, this bit has kind of been answered for you, habil. But what you can do is you can begin to look into the roots of the word. You can begin to look into what the word might mean. I mean, habil is a noun, so like a rope is a noun, so it only has a singular meaning. But there's other words that will have more interesting aspects of this. So for this particular bit, it's kind of the easy part. The next question is, and this is where it gets interesting, is how is this word different from other synonyms? So, what do you do here? Let's swap the word rope for a different word that you can put here. And this is where we can kind of begin to write some things down, inshallah. Actually, you know what? I'll write it here so that we can all see easily. So, I heard someone say string. Yes.
Ribbon?
Ribbon. So what else could you replace this potential word for? And you'll see why in a second. For thread. Yep, Omar. A ladder. Yes, Ron.
Steps?
Good, similar to ladder. Anything else? So you can, I mean,
The way of Allah.
The way of Allah. The thing that you need to do here, and this will become clear in the next question, but is Allah has chosen a word, and that word is perfect. There might be ones that are very similar to it, and there might be ones that are very different to it, but Allah has chosen that word specifically for a specific reason, and we'll come to this in a second. But you can think of, for example, why is that word there altogether? Why doesn't he just say, and hold firmly to Allah Azza wa Jal? So you could remove the word entirely. You could put other things, for example, like you can say cloak. You can say something like the way of Allah, like my father did, the more metaphorical meaning. But Allah hasn't done that. And that gives you interesting inroads as to thinking the next question, which is, why? Why has he chosen not to do that? Now, can you see what we're doing here? We're not interpreting what the Quran means. We're not saying the Quran is saying this. What we're saying is we're taking this meaning, and now I'm thinking, what's happening? Why has Allah done this? And then you begin to really uncover some quite incredible things behind it. So we've got some interesting things, right? So why is it not a string? So if I said hold on to this string, and then I pulled it, what do you expect for it to happen? It would snap. So you kind of answered your own question, right? So why would it not be something like a chain? Which is what? What's a chain made out of, Roman?
Metal.
Metal. So why would he not use chain here? Isn't it stronger? Not flexible? Why would flexibility be relevant? Yes. Got the star student here.
So you don't fall off.
Okay, that's why it's strong. But why do you want it to be flexible for ropes?
So if you swing, so you can swing or bend in a different way.
You can swing it or bend it in a different way. Okay. What else about a chain?
You can break.
Okay. What can a rope not break?
Or chain can snap. Or can work. Because you've got a different.
So what you see, this is really interesting. Okay. So you said there's flexibility. You can say it can snap. There's something really important about a chain that's different to a rope. Heavy.
So you have to put 10 chains or 20 chains. It's easier to put 10 ropes. You become a rope.
So it's what do you mean? Sorry, what's difficult? Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
If you put 10 chains, it will be less than halfway than if you put 10 similar sized ropes. With 10. You go and look into bridges hanged with ropes. They're not hanged with chains.
Okay, so they are not as strong collectively, which is a point I was going to lead on to.
Size, yeah.
So that was, did everyone get that? So if you get 10 chains and you tangle them together, it's not as strong as if you get 10 ropes or 100 ropes and you tangle them together. Those individual smaller strings work together better, even if individually they're very flimsy, right? So there's a meaning here, and this is the point. So what are we doing here? We're looking at a word. This word has been given by Allah Azza wa Jal as a specific reason. We've swapped it for another word, and we think, why has he not done this? Because a chain, you think it's stronger, right? Isn't it metal? It's heavier. But then you see that if you use the word chain, you lose the element of collectiveness. You, as a single chain, you can imagine a chain. If I gave a chain to Omar and I said, look, pull, would it break? Probably not, right? You know, when people get locked in chains, it's one set of chains, isn't it? You can't imagine a rope that's a single thread. A rope is not conceivable except that it's at least 100 wrapped together, isn't it? So Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us here, intrinsically, through the use of the word, that you have to do it together, and you have to do it in a large enough number for it to be strong. And that choice of that word reflects that meaning. And then you see just how perfect the Quran is. Similarly, with the other thing with a chain, is if a single chain breaks, as you mentioned, what happens? The whole thing falls. If a single string in the rope breaks, what happens? Does it fall, Rowan?
No, it gets a bit unstable.
It gets a bit unstable, but it can still hold together, right? So these kind of things is what I'm trying to do here is it's a tool, this way of thinking. So what you need to do now is next time you read the Quran is perform the same exercise. And actually these tools, I've written it into a book. So we're compiling these toolkits, which the kids have been doing in Sunday school, and I want to start doing it with adults, which is a subtle way, it's a different way of reading the Quran. It's not telling you to interpret the Quran, but it's taking the meaning and making you think just how perfect it is because you're going through these different steps. So, the next thing, I've kind of talked about it a bit here already, but it says, what would happen to the meaning if I chose a similar word? So we've done that already. If you chose a more general or a more specific word. So sometimes Allah chooses something, you could make it more general. Like Allah Azza says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. He could have said, O people, or he could have said, O creation, or he could have said, O Umar, right? So he could go very specific, very general. So, and he's done both in different cases, right? So in this specific case, he's been very specific with the choice of the rope of Allah. He could have chosen a more general word, like the way of Allah. Why did he not do that? And what would happen? One interesting thing is what would happen to it if you did the opposite meaning. So if you chose a word that gives the opposite suggestion. So and how would that change things, and what would you begin to understand from there? Or if you did a different word entirely in a different thing and explored it that way. So similarly, what else has the word been used, or where else has this word been used in the Quran? Now this becomes very interesting because it's very easy to do nowadays, because you can just copy and paste this into the search, right? So you can copy. That doesn't work very well. I haven't memorized the keyboard like my dad. There you go, got there enough. So you can type in habil, and you can begin to see where else the word has been used, and what other verses this has been used for. So for example, فَأَلْقَوْا حِبَالَهُمْ وَعِصِيَّهُمْ وَقَالُوا بِعِزَّةِ فِرْعَوْنَ إِنَّا لَنَحْنُ الْغَالِبُونَ. So they cast their ropes and staffs, saying by Pharaoh, it is we who will surely prevail. Does anyone know what this is from? What story this is from? Go on, Noan. Very good, mashallah. It's from the story of Musa alayhi salam. And who is he confronting? Who is he speaking to, Omar? Pharaoh. Very good. So it was the idea of the magicians were challenging Musa, and there's the context of ropes here, and the idea of that. Now, this is something that, again, you can open up your eyes to. Why is the same analogy of items, or why are these items used in one verse and used in another? There may be a connection, there may not be, inshallah. And then finally, so what words have been used alongside it in this word, in this verse or in this ayah, and how are they connected? So I mentioned in the khutbah today, but wa'tasimu. So wa'tasimu in Arabic has been translated correctly is to hold firm. But this is actually from the root meaning, asama, which is to protect yourself. And actually doing something as part of a collective is intrinsically a protection. So I got asked today from after the khutbah, someone was asking me about the youth group. And we were talking, Umar can answer this. And I said, why is it important to have, what's the reward for having a Muslim friend?
It's the same word as praying.
Good, why?
Because if you do it for the sake of Allah, and rather than just meeting up to make money and like just get money and everything.
Good. So when you're meeting with other people, the reward of that, think of it, there's 7 who are shaded on the Day of Judgment, the day there's no shade except his shade. One of them is a person who turned down a really pretty woman and said, I fear Allah. Another one is a just king. and then one of them are two mates who just met up. Like it doesn't like there's like really amazing thing, and then one of them is just I'm just meeting Sean for a cup of coffee. Like why is that as good and as important as these two things, right? Because me and Sean meeting as a friend and inviting others to come to the circle and kind of having that social is as important to society as a just king, as being chaste for your wife and for your husband, as doing all these different things that Allah listed, because of the social fabric it builds and the importance it builds, right? So, and the protection that it offers. Does that make sense? So these things Allah Azza wa Jal points in these subtleties. The idea that He's just connected this word, wa'tasimu, which also has the idea of protection, which also connects to a rope, which intrinsically talks about working together. So my plan is, if I'm allowed to do another topic, inshallah, but the plan is these sorts of little reflections, I find them personally something you can engage much more with. And when you get a bit more experience and insight into some of the other tools, you begin to see how you can use different things in different places. So this specific one, you can go away next time you read the Quran, just take a moment's pause, pick a word, and ask yourself why you want to do that.
Yeah, before you
I thought you were saying time, or you are saying time.
before you finish, one of the things habl in Arabic means to the Arab living in the desert. There's a well there, and you're stuck in the bottom of the well, and somebody threw a rope to get you out. So the rope is used there to save people. But Rowan, what do you want to say?
What is it
Fine.
No.
Is it true that
Muhammad Azam, come listen to the second point I want to say. It's really important. Let me say this so Azam can go one. The other one, there's the Bedouin who reflected on this specific ayah. And he was the first time he heard it. And he said, is that in the Quran? They said, yes. He said, amazing. If someone is about to fall into a valley of fire and you saved him, yeah, will you throw him again? They said, no. He said, if Allah saved us from hellfire, is He going to send us back to it? They said, definitely not. They said, Allah is merciful. So his reflection from the ayah that definitely Allah will not throw us back to hellfire, because He already said we were about to fall in the hellfire and Allah said that. So his reflection was really totally new, and the scholar wrote it in that. When they wrote the tafsir, they included this opinion of that in reflection on the Quran. SubhanAllah. Yeah. Islam. Finished?
Inshallah.
Yeah, you can carry on different time as well. More reflection, inshallah, in the future.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair.